Hello, Canada Files viewers. This is Aidan Jonah, editor-in-chief of the Canada Files here. We are here with the 12th episode of Canada and Palestine, the War on Zionism, co-hosted by myself, editor-in-chief of the Canada Files, and Laith Marouf of Free Palestine TV. Laith, thanks for joining us.
Great to be with you.
As always, it's great to be with you, Laith. So, with the situation for the Axis of Resistance, I think the obvious thing to start about is, I would say Yahya Sinwar and his appointment for the Hamas Political Bureau. Can you talk to us about that and the resiliency of the Axis of Resistance?
Yes, clearly the Zionists assassinated Ismail Haniyeh, thinking that this is going to weaken the position of Hamas or their resistance. But now, with the unanimous appointment of Sinwar as the head of the political bureau, with the support of all the branches of Hamas around the region and on the ground inside Gaza. This is a clear statement that the resistance will continue, given that Sinwar is the head of the Gaza on the ground Hamas branch and has been, responsible for building up the resistance in Gaza as we see it. So this is an indication that the resistance will continue. Anyone that thought the assassination of Haniyeh would lead to a weakened Hamas that will take any orders from the United States or the Zionist colony in regards to their negotiations is now probably knows that that was a very big mistake to assassinate Haniyeh, who had a much more you know amicable and more negotiating face than this, Sinwar, who is very tough in his speech.
All right, Laith. So, building with this, obviously, the assassination and its ramifications, let's talk about it. Iran has made big statements and has promised to strike Israel. What's happening here? What do you think is gonna come along in the next few days?
Yeah, everybody's waiting right now for the response of Hezbollah, of Iran, of Ansarullah in Yemen. And it's clear that it maybe, most probably, will be a combined attack from all sides. This is why the United States moved so much air assets and air defenses into the region. It's clear also that the response will be strategic. It's not going to be tactical or symbolic. It's going to be strategic. Therefore, it's going to have to change the formula of the military balance between the axis of resistance and the Zionist colony. And given that we just saw all those videos of the gang rape of Palestinian prisoners by the Zionist soldiers, I think the whole world right now wants the axis of resistance to land a big blow on the Zionist colony, because the sense of dehumanization and is too much right now for most of humanity. We look at what the United States could do. I think Biden and the deep state in the United States is going to respond, and this is going to snowball to a full regional war with the involvement of the United States. And this is probably why the axis of resistance is taking so long to respond. Not only are they playing a psychological warfare situation with the Zionists, with now their colonists freaking out, with all the flights being canceled almost to the Ben Gurion airport, but also they are preparing themselves on the ground for the possibility of retaliation from the United States and from the Zionist colony. So we see Iran installing a lot of new air defense systems and radars, and Russia supplying them with these new systems. And so this is where we at. We're in the setup stage for what's coming, and it's coming now. I don't know how long this is going to take, but we're right now getting ready for that, I think.
Right, Laith. So I think one of the things we rarely do it, but I think it's been striking to see in the US, the somewhat collapse of the overall Palestine solidarity movement in terms of the unity that was there, right? Because of Kamala Harris now being the presidential candidate. So what do you think that kind of says about the future of the Palestine protests in the West? It's a big question, but I think people would want your insight there.
Yeah, I mean, look, I have, worked within the Palestine solidarity movement in Canada and the US and the West for almost 30 years. And I had come to the conclusion a long time ago, even in the beginnings of my activism, that the only thing that is effective is radical action. It didn't matter how much, propaganda games you play or media presence you make. If you cannot harm the Zionist lobby and the governments behind them, and I mean, uh, force them to expose themselves with fascist positions, and or if taking down their established powerhouses and or their businesses, then there's no point of what you're doing because so this is if I was involved in the shutdown of Netanyahu in the year 2002. That was a radical action where we confronted both the security establishment of Canada, along with the security establishment of the Zionist colony, as well as all their top figureheads, whether it was Netanyahu or Aaron Cutler or the prime minister at the time, Chrétien. So that was a radical action that had a great and if a result where we landed punches on Netanyahu and his supporters in Canada. We taught a lesson to the security police in forces in Montreal that said you cannot touch a Palestinian without getting punished back for that. And we made anyone that worked with Netanyahu and the Canadian, security apparatuses regret that, including the Concordia University, who lost millions upon millions of dollars because they were lackeys of Zionist, apartheid. So, what is going to happen in the United States with this Kamala Harris situation? I mean, any Palestinian, any Arab, any Muslim, any Black person, any person of uh, conscious in the United States that right now wants to, push people to vote for Kamala Harris is a burden actually on liberation. There is no options where you can end imperialist positions and actions of the United States through the ballot. That's such a childish thing to think that. Number one, there is no such thing as democracy. I don't believe people's vote actually is counted correctly. And if there is a possibility that that is actually happening, that these votes are counted correctly, it's because those who oppose the imperial puppets that are put in front of the electorate to choose from are already excluded from the vote, or their voting is made irrelevant somehow. And finally, because we have a manipulative propaganda machine that even Goebbels would dream of having, and Hitler regime, the United States has the most powerful propaganda machine in the world. It spans across all the territories that it controls and in multiple languages, and it sways those who have weak minds to follow in its directives that it does. Anyone that wants change in the United States at this point should be taking radical actions, like Palestine action in the UK. This is the minimum that people should be doing, is destroying factories that are sending weapons to the Zionist colony, and facing off with the police establishment and the military establishment. The media itself, occupy the media. What are people doing but complaining, let's say, about the media all the time? Take follow the lead of the indigenous Mexican revolutionaries in Oaxaca who occupied, for instance, the radio and television stations in Oaxaca at the time when the Mexican government was trying to oppress the indigenous people there. You have to occupy the media and start broadcasting from it. Building a podcast here and a podcast there is irrelevant. You're not reaching the masses. You need to do so. And this is also the same for Canada. CBC should be occupied. CTV should be occupied. They should be liberated. And people should get on air and force a change in the opinions of their fellow citizens.
All right, Laith. Well, I'll put it to the Canada context now. So we have some vague efforts. There is, from what I heard on Eve Engler's show, there is an encampment for Palestine still out in Nanaimo that hasn't given in yet, from what I heard there, which is interesting because most have already just given in. But, and this is the thing that I covered for the Canada files, actually, you had this, apparently it's now Zionist funded, but it was formerly allegedly Saudi funded, a media, Iran International. They were claiming that 60% of pro-Palestine campus protesters, right? So they aren't authentic online users, but you see they're talking about 60% of users in favor of the McGill encampment. They're being inauthentic. But then these not authentic users were Iranian, like IRGC people in Iran. Like it was insane. It was genuinely psychotic. Analysis from this company, XPOZ, supposedly a cybersecurity company. And it's, I wrote about it, not because if that was the article on its own, but you see, this article got endorsed by, Kevin Vuong, the Zionist anti-communist MP who tried to use Chinagate to cover up his own scandal of hiding sexual assault charges that did get dropped. And then you have Leo Housakos, who's a conservative senator. They both basically endorsed the article. They were on International, so that's a sitting MP, a sitting senator, endorsing that. And as I explained, I built on Lascaris' analysis bit, right? Because it's Iranians working with the quote unquote Iranian regime, that means IRGC. Right, that effectively means IRGC. And guess who's listed on the Canadian terrorist list? IRGC. And guess what in Bill C-70? If you can commit intimidation against certain people. Say, for example, Zionists claim intimidation because intimidation is everywhere to them. You can get punished with life imprisonment because if you do it supposedly with for the benefit or association with, like a terrorist group. And guess what? IRGC is a terrorist group. So it's a pretty easy path. If a rabid Canadian prosecutor wants to follow that logic, they could go and file charges against the McGill encampment protesters. This is the reprisals that are coming. I'm sure the encampment protesters thought they were escaping this by hiding. But the lesson of something like this, and I mean, there's been many lessons before this, but this has to be like a breaking point if they're serious about things. You are going to get reprisals against you even if you stop. And in the McGill case, they didn't voluntarily stop, of course, right? They did get cracked down upon, but as you were saying, like, right, they didn't put up a physical fight for it, right? They let it happen, I would guess, because they thought, and this is my thought here, that they probably were saying, oh, we don't put up the fight, then we're not going to get charged, we're not going to get targeted, right? So McGill wasn't as shameful as the other spots, but at the same time, they didn't put up a fight. And now look, no benefit for not fighting. And arguably, I think this kind of thing is the logic that sets the precedent for reprisals of even these encampments that just voluntarily quit. This is where we're coming to, right? It's just this increasing prosecution and repression. This atmosphere is being set for it, right? It's being set for it. So
Yes, yes. You
this,
look at the what you just mentioned, the Iran International and these MPs and MP and senator. I mean, these are actually all fake people that don't have a position themselves. And in fact, they're all plastic. There's nobody that does more plastic surgeries, it seems like, than the Iranian pro-Zionist camp. They're all plasticky puppets. And it may feel scary for anybody that is involved, that they're being called as being supported by the IRGC. But at this moment, what is the Canadian government going to do? Round up these youth and put them in jails? I think that'll be actually great. Maybe that will wake up some of the community, and to let them take more action. At this moment, I think I've always followed this policy of I enter a field to work on bringing Palestine more space on it, and if I see it doesn't work, then you need to force your enemy to take the fascist position, to take away the rights of others, not only Palestinians. And this is where their problem lies with any of the liberal thought, that you can somehow, by voting Harris instead of Trump, better the situation of Palestine. In reality, it's not going to better the situation of Palestine. Probably it's better that you get Trump elected so he can go full out fascist and take away other people's rights, not only the Palestinians, the Arabs and Muslims, or those who support Palestine. Let him take more other people's rights so they can also be mobilized with you. This is the basic of how rebellions are built. And some, maybe some viewers are not going to like this statement. But as long as you are playing within this liberal playing field, you're actually at a disadvantage. In order to mobilize people, you need them to get radicalized. And look, the Canadian government is just going to be more and more shameful and shameless in its actions in regards to Palestine. Look at what they did with the Hiroshima and Nagasaki commemorations in Japan. There was a demonstration in Hiroshima from Japanese people against the presence of the Israeli ambassador at the commemorations. The governor of Hiroshima gave a speech where he basically said Israel is a genocidal state that is refusing international law and is threatening people with nuclear weapons. That was followed by the Nagasaki mayor refusing to invite the Israeli ambassador. And now we see all these fascist countries like Canada, the United States, the UK, pulling out of the commemorations of the Nagasaki nuclear bombing because they want to support the right of the Zionist colony to have the ability to nuke other people, to mass rape on television Palestinians, to genocide them, to starve them. None of that would happen if the Canadian government is embroiled in a direct confrontation with its own people. You see, what those who work for Palestine need to do in Canada is force an internal battle. Look at what the Zionists are doing in the UK. They're freaked out that the vast majority of citizens in the UK are pro-Palestinian that have been demonstrating for 10 months peacefully. And all the pressure from the media and the political class have not led to the movement yielding to them. So what did they do? They mobilized fascists in the streets to beat up Arabs and Muslims. And that is in order, not because their primary target is not just beating up the Palestinian and Arab and Muslim communities in the UK. Their primary target is to actually get the police and the government to institute martial law to ban the demonstrations basically for Palestine. The only public exhibition that was allowed in the UK of support for Palestine. There was no space in the media, there was no space in the political spheres, in the parliament and so on. The only space was the street. Now they were going to institute basically martial law as this continues to ban the Palestinian solidarity movement from having any space in public. You know what? The Palestinian movement in Canada and everywhere else have to follow that direction, but in the opposite way. They have to force the Canadian establishment, police, military, to actually spend all their resources trying to stop them instead of sending their weapons to Israel. This is how you can help liberate Palestine. Have the direct confrontation with the Canadian security apparatuses and the Canadian political class. That's how it's done.
When you say clashes, Laith, you mean in the sense of, like challenging politicians in terms of the policy, or like direct clashes to like what end, I guess is my question.
You should be occupying and destroying all the offices. Destroy them of the members of parliament. Their offices. Let them have to figure out what's happening. You know what? Go into the Israeli lobby offices. Destroy them, not only occupy them. Hmm? Go into see the police officers that are involved in violence against the Palestinian movement. Name them, put their home addresses out there, right? Let the police officers also know that their violence that is supported by the state will not go unpunished. Okay? Let the whole put the name and home address of the main propagandists in the Canadian media. Well, the Zionists, when they were attacking me, they went and searched for the pictures of my children and they put them out on Twitter, my underage children. They went and found my home address and put it out on Twitter and put a picture of my house. And by the way, the police didn't care. They said, nothing here. But you know what's going to happen if you put the home address and the picture of the house of Heather Reisman or the head of the CIGA? What's going to happen, right? This is what needs to be done. People need to make it dangerous for the Zionists to continue the work that they're doing. You have to raise the stakes. It's not only our lives and our livelihoods that should be at stake while our enemy is sitting comfortably where they are in Canada, sending weapons and money to kill us here on the ground and rounding up our children in the universities in Canada.
All right, Laith. So speaking of the political atmosphere in Canada, there is a Deborah Lyons, basically just Canada's ambassador to support Israeli genocide. That's what she is. That's all she is. But there's a little interview Q&A in the National Post, and I want to read a little bit because you'll understand why. The question: do you fear that there is any risk of allegations of anti-Semitism stifling legitimate political speech? Lyons responds, I'm less worried about that and more worried about the level of hatred that is growing and where that could take us. So, the free speech myth, they keep making displays of setting it on fire, yet people keep really wanting to delusionally believe it. The Campbell's been calling this out for a while. how they treat the Russian Canadian population, the Chinese Canadian population. And we've tried to hit that out. We've reminded people about the Venezuelan Canadians being blocked from voting. We broke that story. We reminded people about Iranian Canadians being prevented from voting. We mentioned that Syrian Canadians were prevented from voting. Obviously, Ava Bartlett did some of that reporting initially for RT. But that there's no free speech, and I think that's a great the Lions mark. I want to mention that because it's a great example of where the Canadian ruling class is at and the level of I think it's comfort that must be emphasized. They have an extreme level of comfort about the docility of the Canadian population. They are very, very, very comfortable. The partners in genocide, your country's leaders, are very comfortable because of your inaction. They are fully confident to talk about the crushing of, to just flimsily just flick away this idea of free speech that they use to, they use it as like a beacon of Western superiority, quote unquote, right? Authoritarian China, authoritarian Russia, yeah, right? Now they're so comfortable with your docility that they don't even pretend that anymore, right? It's an indictment of the protest movement in the country, right? That they can just say this stuff, and there's no consequences. There's no consequences for any of this, right? So that's really the extent I have to say about the Lions front, unless you have anything to say, Laith.
Well, she's obviously being interviewed by a fascist Zionist publication, the National Post. So she's, on home turf, and she is herself a fascist Zionist. And clearly, again, as long as, like you said, as long as they're comfortable, there's no threat to them. There's nothing that's going to affect their livelihood and or their safety. They're going to continue doing this. So, where does she live? Where does her husband work or live? Where does her children work and live? These are all should be made public. People should make the life of individuals like this, not comfortable.
Laith,
Where is the offices of the National
they should be
Post?
moving soon. They should be moving soon because if the MPs get their way, maybe we'll have protective zones around government officials' houses soon. The MPs tried to get that for their own houses before, as discussed. They gotta, as we've both been saying, action, and it's got to be
Yeah.
soon, right? So carry on, Laith. Sorry.
Yeah, so definitely it has to be done. But look, I don't have much hope in that. You know, I actually almost don't care if the Canadian public loses all their rights. Maybe they actually deserve that, you know. The thing is that Palestinians and people in our region here will liberate themselves without the help of anybody. It would be great to have the help and support of human, peoples in the West, but it's not essential to my liberation. I've, trying to educate the Western public is really to help them. Mhm. But we are going to a full war. And given that, looking at how the Canadian government, yeah, so what I'm saying is that the Canadian public may find themselves in a situation where they've lost all their rights once this war breaks out and the Canadian government is involved in it. And it will be at that point too late for them to save themselves. I know that us as in this region are working for our own liberation. We will be able to face off the might of the Western Empire. The question is, at that point, the Canadian public, are they going to be able to liberate themselves? That's up to them. Looking at the historical record, even from just now, what we were talking about, it's clear that Canadian public are, like wet rags. That's what they are.
It's pretty ugly, Laith. I think there's no doubt about that. And I think the point that you've raised consistently is right now the risk of the concentration camps, like you talked about, that's a much more likely series of events than a Palestine movement rising up. I mean, that's again, I would be the most pleased person in the world to be proved wrong. about that, but I don't think you're really going to dispute that even. Like, I think it's more likely that that happens before. I just think that the Canadian people are very detached from world events. I think because our colony state, it doesn't hit them so much as individuals. You know, there hasn't been the war on Canadian territory since the intersettler fight in the 1800s, right? Um, so I think there's a detachment from the consequences and reality of imperialism, right? For everyone except for, indigenous nations, right? The colonial attacks they face in the ongoing genocide. Except for them, it's pretty much total detachment, right? So let's certainly hope that it doesn't happen. I don't think either one of us are hoping that it does, but we have to be bluntly realistic and say that it's a definite possibility, right? And so a little transition because we do have one or two things more to get to. The their Canadian Armed Forces, they're placing some staff equipment in the Mediterranean. Um, Now, of course, there's always a possibility that Canada has some sort of side role. There's some side tactics or so forth, surveillance maybe that they're doing while that's purportedly there. But certainly, Canada realizes that there's that risk of regional war. But remarkably, not remarkably actually at all, but just typical of the settler colony, is that Canada's Foreign Minister Melanie Joly was complaining all Iran's destabilizing the Middle East. It's August of 2024. Nobody buys that anymore. You could pull that stunt in, before October 7th, and a lot of people believe that, but that the mindset has changed for people. Reality has seeped in, despite some of the best efforts of many people. So this world has changed, and people don't buy that anymore, right? But you just have a Canada that blames Iran and then admits that there could be regional war. But of course, again, it's never the Zionist entity's fault because they want the Zionist entity to win. That's what it is. It's just cynical posturing BS that they use for public relations with the Canadian public, right? That's just all it is.
There's nobody more of a plastic sock puppet in the Canadian government than Melanie Joly, who did a plastic surgery to remove her mole, her famous mole that she had on her face prior to getting elected to the parliament as a sidekick for Trudeau. The thing is that any Canadian military that comes to here and tries to join this war should be ready for their death. And in fact, we will be celebrating the death of Canadian soldiers if they dare enter our territories here. And the Canadian public needs to know that this is going to be the fate of these soldiers, the families of these soldiers, if they care about their children, really, should be trying to stop this from happening. But again, it's not much hope in the Canadian public to do anything relevant. So we will do it on their behalf here. And we will send these soldiers back packing in coffins. And let's see how much Melanie Joly or Trudeau can do to change that fact.
All right, Laith. Well, I think that's the place to leave off this episode of Canada and Palestine, the war on Zionism. So, for the second time in a row, only message at the end is go support Free Palestine TV's journalism before there's the potential of the regional war breaking out. Go get the money to Free Palestine TV before things kick off. Laith, if you have anything more to say, let me know.
Thank you very much, man. Thank you.
All right, and to the audience as well, and of course, Laith, thank you for all getting to the end of this episode. And we'll leave it there. Keep an eye on the Campbell's content. More comes through every other day or so. Talk to you all later. Goodbye.